Hey guys, what's going on and welcome back to the Counties experiment where I've turned the top two divisions of the English football structure into a county-based league system. One team per county, let's see who's done well over the next 4 years. Obviously, last time 1 year, 4 more have now passed. However, I'll start with the news that football still hasn't come home. One thing I will say up front is I've had a quick nosy around the major areas, so I know the basic story of what's going on, partially just to make sure that nothing's broken in the meantime. We're good. Everything's fine. Considering I've done tweaks beyond the basic editor, I'm quite impressed that nothing's broken majorly. There's one minor thing, it doesn't affect the simulation. Football was coming home, and then Doniel Marlon made sure it wasn't. The Euros went even worse. In case you're wondering, Jose Mourinho. Naturally, but we can go from there to the English Counties Premier Division and see how the first 5 years have panned out. We know that Merseyside won the effectively inaugural Counties Premier Division. We'll pretend this is a long-standing thing and it has been a thing for a lifetime. Merseyside with a 2021 victory. 4 more years have passed and it has alternated between Merseyside and Manchester. Yeah, there appears to be a top 2 disconnect. There's not a big 5, there's not even a big 3, as you would imagine with the London. Considering that London is the combined efforts of Tottenham, Chelsea and Arsenal, with a few extras here and there, they've been surprisingly distant. If I go through the 5 years, 15 points behind in the most recent season. They were 5th the season before that. I mean, Manchester and Merseyside with 93 and 103. Imagine having 93 points and not winning it. 103. Again, London, miles behind. London, a little bit closer in the 22 season, and we saw in the first season, they were 4th, they were behind West Midlands. They were part of this chasing pack of formerly just regular Premier League sides that are now the basis for their county version. Wolverhampton through to Leeds, effectively. The ones that you would expect to be doing better than the former Championship sides. There's an interesting general story in the fact that quite often a team outside the top 4 does something else and wins another trophy to get European football via another means. The most recent season has Hertfordshire, based off Watford, winning the Europa Conference League, seemingly. East Sussex getting it this season, judging by the fact that 7th got nothing via the FA Cup. Tyne Wear via the FA Cup, presumably. The only season where everything sort of pans out normally is 21-22, where Lancashire made the Champions League, sort of out of nowhere. Because bear in mind that Lancashire are just Burnley, plus a couple of Blackburn and a couple of Preston players, and that's it. They've not really strengthened that much. The fact that Lancashire beat out West Yorkshire, who were given Haaland, and Leicestershire, who are just Leicester anyway, and the combined efforts of Wolverhampton and Aston Villa, that's quite impressive that Lancashire ended up 4th. I mean, Tyne Wear is just Newcastle plus a few good players. Henderson, Pickford and Giovanni Reina were added to Tyne Wear, so the fact they're all the way down here is surprising. East Sussex is just Brighton, effectively, and South Yorkshire were given a few good players as well. Quite a few, actually. Dominic Calvert-Lewin amongst them. But for Lancashire, who are just Burnley, they didn't really add any better players to their squad. There were just some good more options, like Adam Armstrong for striking. So they didn't go sort of Wood and Armstrong for a front 2. It's not really a massive upgrade, but it is technically an upgrade, according to current abilities, over any other second striker they have at Burnley. That's particularly impressive. We'll see how they get on in the Champions League. Lincolnshire went immediately down. Quite East Riding levels of woefulness, but they went straight back down again. I wasn't expecting much from them, in fairness. But there is an annoying tendency for the teams to go up to go straight back down, I have noticed straight away. Because it is worth saying that the majority of the sides that are in the Premier League were the former Championship sides. It's worth noting there are actually no former Championship sides in the Championship to start with, because East Riding, based on Hull, who technically start in League One, were the lowest reputation team to be in the top division, which meant that this division, which now has teams being relegated down, Norfolk naturally obliterated the Championship when they went down. As you can see, this Cheshire's Crewe, Suffolk is Ipswich, Oxfordshire is obviously Oxford, Lincolnshire similarly Lincoln. League One sides as of now, Cambridgeshire, Peterborough, promoted to the Championship, admittedly this most recent season, but same with Hull. They are the top end of the Championship. They are typically the ones in the playoffs. The counties that are based off teams in League Two, Vanarama even, are typically occupying the bottom end of the table, as you would expect. Now, their reputations were evened out to be better than the now League One sides, so they should be drawing in the players over those sides in League One. Financially, they might have a bit of an issue compared to those former Premier League sides that are now in League One, but that shouldn't be an issue too much. And one thing I can say is that is working. The former Premier League sides in League One don't have their players anymore. Man United this isn't part of the experiment. Like, this isn't a major part of the experiment. This is just more to make sure that these guys stay relatively uncompetitive. But Arsenal and Manchester United have been fighting for this. This is where it does go a little bit weird, because this is the one thing that didn't work. Because I kept a playoff system in League One just to keep the fixture list the same. It's only doing a playoff final between first and fourth. It's not doing a playoff between second and third. I don't know what's going on there, but it doesn't break the game. Whoever's top still remains champion, which I'm fine with. There's a few seasons where technically two champions, or one actually, sorry, there's one season where there's technically two champions, where Aston Villa won the match between first and fourth. They're both being listed as champions. I'll have to look into that if I ever do this as a proper database. But it doesn't affect the simulation. That was the one problem. But if you go on the season preview, there are literally 3 players still at major clubs. Fred, Bailey and Lindelof are the only 3 still at Manchester United. I don't know why they've not left yet. But one here, Chelsea. Chelsea have loaned Jared Branthwaite into their side. So there's not a player that they still own. It's not a player that they own. The 3 Man United players are the only players remaining. And if you go on Chelsea's squad, for instance, they are the highest predicted. Nigel Atkins in charge. Their wage structure is largely fine. Like, the majority of their players are on a few £1,000s a week, which is acceptable, really, to be at the top end of this new League One. There's a few players that are on a lot of money, and I don't really know how they've achieved that, because I thought League One and League Two had wage caps. Now, I've looked into the rules, and it's actually a percentage of turnover, which teams like Chelsea and Manchester United, they've still got a decent turnover because they're still bringing in players. They're still bringing in punters to the matches. They're still getting 60,000 people every single week. They still got some of the finances through gate receipts. I don't know how their sponsorship's going at this stage and external funding, but their turnovers are still quite good. They've still got a lot. If you go on their overview again, they have an insane they have an insane transfer budget. They just can't use it. Same with their wage budget. They just can't use it down here. But Chelsea are actually the anomaly here. None of the other major sides have this issue with wages. They don't have any major wage players except for the ones that were already there beforehand. Like Ben Wyburn there, 30 grand a week. It's a lot, but that's sort of where they're pushing it. And over time, I expect that to sort of filter down with Eddie Howe in charge there. They're still putting in decent rep managers, which is the annoying part. By the way, in case you're wondering, apologies to fans of Brentford and Fulham who actually went down. The curious thing about Chelsea is they are predicted first. They finished second last season, but 3 seasons prior, mid-table. But we're not here for that division. It's just a curious side thing that's been going on in the background. I just want to go back to the Counties Championship and just highlight 2 major overachievements in this most recent season. Because you may recall, and you can probably notice if you know your logos, Durham are based off Hartlepool, who are Vanarama to start with, and Worcester are based on Kidderminster Harriers, who I'm pretty certain are 6th tier to start with. Yeah, Vanarama National League North. They are being managed by Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who you may recall actually from the 1-year simulation wasn't actually removed from Manchester United by me. He was removed by the board. In League One, he somehow got sacked by Manchester United. Yes, they were missing a fair few players at that point, but they still had the majority of their squad, and if I did do this as a released version, I would probably remove more of those players from those teams and nerf the fan base levels and probably the stadium capacity, just to make sure they get more in line with the rest of that division. Quicklier. Words are hard. But yes, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is in charge of, effectively, Kidderminster, now in the form of Worcestershire. And that is a heck of an overachievement when you think about it, because they didn't gain that many players, I don't think. And if they did, they're not still here, most likely, because 5 years in, a lot of the teams have sold the players I gave them. There's not really an easy way. By the way, that's not the Aaron Ramsey. That's a different Aaron Ramsey. Don't get excited. I did the first time. Can't remember if Tom Hamer was a player I gave to Worcestershire. Well, he's from Bolton, so I doubt it. No, he was signed. There's not really an obvious way to fix those players I give to the counties for a decent amount of time, because if I was going to release it to the public for public use, then you probably don't want those players necessarily stuck there forever. There's 2 ways to really go about it. Is you can loan them for multiple years, have that fixed in, but that's a lot of work to do for every single player that you've stuck in there. You can loan it with a future guaranteed transfer, then obviously for 3 years they're loaned to you or whatever. We sort of locks them in for a few years. That's probably the best idea I've got, because the other one is obviously said a future transfer way down the line, but that means those teams are then stuck with those players no matter what they do from that point onwards. And if I was to release it to the public, you may not necessarily want that. It's another decent overachievement for Durham. Again, they've sold all the players I gave them. Robbie Fowler's in charge there, so the 2 overachieving teams in this particular division, managed by Premier League legend strikers, Weird coincidence. But I'm loving this now developing rivalry between Robbie Fowler's County Durham and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's Worcestershire, which is a nightmare to say quickly. But there are very few players who have remained at the teams I gave them. One of the very few is Carl Darlow, who remained at Northamptonshire, where he is from, even if he was never been part of their team prior to this. Don't know how that happened. Clearly went through in Nottingham's academy. I can see from Northampton's team they acquired Dan Byrne, who I gave to Northumberland, and they sold him immediately, basically. Nobody really did anything in that first season, not even in January. So I guess it took a little. Obviously, it took a while for the COVID finances to be undone by the end of the first season. So maybe teams actually had a bit of money after the first season. And Northamptonshire spent nearly £4 million on Dan Byrne, which to a team that was formerly Vanarama North is a lot of money. But he was the only player I gave them. It's worth saying these former Vanarama sides had a lot of players on a few $100,000 a week. If I go to the top end, they've got a lot of players registered. They've got a lot of players, Northumberland. They don't have an under 23s, which is probably the reason why. But you can see the top end of their squad is, a few thousand per player now. So they've sort of equalised. They've got a player called Phoenix Patterson. That's got to be a real person. Fair enough. It's like a superhero alter ego. I can see they've got Josh Gromer, formerly of Huddersfield, and Lincoln's Ellis Chapman. So they are signing players. Ben Amos I gave to a different club. Yeah, I gave him to Cheshire. He's recently moved to Northumberland at the age of 35 for 15 grand. That's a bit good pickup for them. So whilst a lot of these players have been sold on, at very least they are generating income for these lower end sides, which is nice. Obviously, a notable one in that regard is Herefordshire's Jared Bowen, who was sold for quite a lot of money, I think. Again, like Dan Byrne, he went basically straight away. £13.5 million to West Yorkshire, which is a notable peak on their transfer graph. They've not actually really reinvested it in squad players. They're still spending about $1 million a year, less than. So I'm hoping they've reinvested that £13.5 million in facilities. They've got a balance of 9.5. So it's nice to see these teams who I did give players with fairly high wages, particularly comparable to the rest of their squads. They've not been negatively affected financially by that. They are bringing in enough money via the original championship funding or whatever to stay in the black. So they are surviving quite nicely, which is one of the major things I wanted to make sure still happened. There was obviously a risk that they would just collapse financially as clubs with the players I gave them. They're fine. One thing I didn't particularly highlight in the year one simulation was the FA Cup. I kind of forgot about it. It's still contested between all the clubs in English football. So you've got the county clubs, and then you've got all the clubs that are in League One and below that. What's interesting about the FA Cup in this particular experiment is not won by the dominant sides in the top division as often. In the 5 years that have been simulated, Merseyside have won it twice. Other sides have won it 3 times. West Yorkshire, Tyne and Wear, and East Sussex, probably the most notable of them, being effectively just Brighton. And I think that's arguably one of the most interesting things about this experiment so far. That and the fact that London aren't as competitive as they should be. Just a reminder on the London front, they were given Thomas Tuchel as a manager. I did base it on Spurs because of their stadium and their facilities, but I did give them all of the best players from Chelsea and the ones from Arsenal that would make the cut to be in and around the first team squads. But I did give them arguably the best manager. I removed Mourinho, who is in there originally just because he was sacked in real life, and then I gave them the best manager in London that remained, which was Thomas Tuchel. At this point, I should just say that I did remove all the other Premier League managers that were put down to League One because I couldn't have Ancelotti managing in League One. Apparently I forgot to remove Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, as we saw last time round, but he was sacked anyway. I also forgot to remove Mikel Arteta. He lasted 3 years before he was sacked, and replaced by Ian Holloway. In terms of managers, I'll just show you the major moves. Pep Guardiola was sacked by Manchester at the end of last season. He was replaced by Bielsa, who then won this most recent title and then retired. Great swan song from him. Nagelsmann's in charge of them. So Pep's in charge of Greater London now. Nagelsmann's in charge of Greater Manchester. Klopp remains in charge of Merseyside. Just notice how many of their last known lineup are actually still Liverpool players. Trent, Fabinho, Keita, Mane, Salah. They signed Haaland from West Yorkshire. Irritating. Alisson remains in goal. But in terms of other interesting manager movements, I'm just going to show you the highlights here. Stuart Pearce has returned to Nottinghamshire. Chris Wilder remains at South Yorkshire, who, of their own regard, signed Harry Maguire, who I was tempted to give to South Yorkshire at the beginning because that's where he was from, but I thought he might squeeze into the Manchester team. He was fringe for Manchester, and then South Yorkshire bought him back effectively. So going forward, if I was to do a new release, I would actually put him into South Yorkshire because he doesn't get used by Manchester as much as I thought he would. He was a borderline case. Him and John Stones were borderline cases. Neither of them played enough for Manchester, and both of them moved on. John Stones, I believe, would also return to this club. Harry Maguire's from Sheffield, and John Stones is from Barnsley. And I do believe Barnsley is part of South Yorkshire. So both of them would return to South Yorkshire. That would be one change I would make in a future version. Although John Stones might be buffed in FM22, so any future versions, he might fare better. The game did the job for me there with Harry. Michael Appleton's in charge of Tyne and Wear, which is a bit weird, but let's not forget the fact that he would be at Lincolnshire in the Championship to start with. Claude Puel's in charge of West Yorkshire, which I think is not great. Bielsa was succeeded by Nuno, which is fair enough. I can't help but feel like Claude is a downgrade. Sorry, Claude Puel was France manager. There's some things I don't know about this world of football still, but like I said, I looked at basically the headlines. Freddie Youngberg's in charge of Bristol because why not? Rooney's still in charge of Derbyshire. They've done well. They've survived. They've been relegation threatened basically every year, but they've survived and acquired Sean Longstaff to join county man Jamal Lascelles. One of the few players actually to remain in the club I gave them to. Gerrard's in charge of Dorset. I made fun of this. I think I highlighted the East Riding situation at the end of the first year simulation. They sacked their manager at the end of the first season for the worst points total in Premier League history, or Premier Division history. They gave the job to the former assistant manager permanently. He's still there, and he's still rubbish. Sorry, he wasn't even the assistant manager. He was the coach, then caretaker manager. But they got more pay up front now. Sean Dyche remains at Lancashire because the only way you manage to prize him away from, effectively, Burnley is if you offer him the England job. But I think the most surprising manager appointment is one that was already there. Xisco is still manager of Hertfordshire 5 years in, which for a team that's based on Watford is incredibly surprising. I think the fact that they are a slightly bigger fish in a slightly smaller pond now has helped because they have been consistently in the Premier League, and they did finish 6th in the previous season, getting European football, which then, of course, they have apparently won. Does help Xisco's manager. Imagine Watford having a manager for 5 years. It's unthinkable. Speaking of European football, Merseyside have done well. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but basically, the trend is Manchester and Merseyside tend to do well. London, again, surprisingly not as good as they should be. The other teams that weren't based on Champions League qualifying teams already tend to not get out of the group. West Midlands did in the most recent season and then lost in the round of 16. That's about as far as any of the other sides have gone. It's only Merseyside and Manchester that's kind of gone beyond the quarterfinals. Merseyside obviously have won it 3 times. Manchester got to that final. Dortmund, who I nicked Bellingham, Haaland and Reina from, have done well without them. They've raided Norwich of all teams, having now having Buendia and Max Aarons in their squad. There's Max. They also have my favourite player, of course, Alex Gallardo. If you watch my regular saves, you'll understand why I like Alex Gallardo. But yeah, Dortmund, still nicking English talent. Bukayo Saka's there as well as Max Aarons. And Angel Gomez. They've done just fine without those 3-star players. An all-English final. London did get to one semi-final, but that's about it. Merseyside again for the first season. The Europa League has been a lot less successful for the English sides. West Yorkshire getting to a semi-final most recently. West Midlands did win it the season before, and you saw got to the round of 16 in the subsequent Champions League. The season before that was an absolute travesty for all English sides. Second knockout round was as far as any of them got, and they were beaten by Eintracht Frankfurt. Despite the fact they beat Bayer Leverkusen, lost to Eintracht Frankfurt. The season before that wasn't any better. Second knockout round. Although admittedly, Tyne and Wear did come up against AC Milan. And the first season was won by Manchester, who finished 3rd in their group in the Champions League. And I'm not going to go into the Conference League in any particular detail, but you can see most recent season, indeed, was won by Hertfordshire. Ismail Assar, still there and doing sensationally, apparently, but a new gen leading the striking lineup. One thing I absolutely haven't looked at is the Cowbell Cup, which is, a little bit more dominated by the 2 top teams. But the most recent one won by Leicestershire, and West Midlands did win the first one. I am slightly curious about the Papa John's Trophy. MK Dons won the first one, despite the presence of teams like Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United, with good players still. Arsenal, Chelsea, Sheffield Wednesday and Chelsea again. But I'm slightly curious about the under-23 teams. Yeah, the under-23 teams don't get through anywhere near as much as they do in real life. It's the Merseyside, West Midlands there and that one. The only ones that seem to come in are the under-23s of Manchester and Merseyside. They're the only ones that seem to get through regularly. Nottingham did there, and West Yorkshire did in the most recent season. It's actually made the Papa John's Trophy actually interesting for once. I'll just round off by looking at a few of the squads, in case you are wondering. Sancho's gone to London. This, of course, the combined London squads. They've acquired Robertson at some point, and Gomez. They've raided Merseyside a little bit in that regard, but otherwise, fairly the same. Aaron Ramsdale's moved there, ironically. Now part of the Arsenal side at London. But Federico Valverde, I can get on board with that one. Still actually quite heavily weighted to the original team. Great to Manchester, similarly, obviously, being largely Manchester City still as things stood, still quite heavily Manchester City. Although Calvert-Lewin did move to Greater Manchester, apparently he's wanted and requested to leave. Not gone well, apparently, for them, but Phil Foden, Rashford, Sterling, all still there. Silva, Greenwood, Diaz. They require Sessegnon for some reason. De Bruyne is still there at 33. Bazanu's still there at 20. Bazanu's still there, for God's sake. But they've acquired Frankie de Jong and Ansu Fati. Again, actually, still surprisingly weighted to the original team. Hampshire's goalkeeper problem was eventually solved by Alphonse Areola. They didn't sign a goalkeeper in their first season. They have acquired some good players, though. One thing you will notice as you go through these squads is sides other than London, Manchester and Merseyside do sign some genuinely quality players now. Because there's less options in the Premier League for these teams to go to, or the top end, they are being sort of filtered out towards these, well, formerly mid-table sides. Hassan Daka is at Hampshire, for instance. Vlahovic is at Lancashire. The Leicestershire squad's still just largely Leicestershire, although they do have Ndombele. They did acquire Gabriel Jesus, who has lost their trust in the manager, which is Jess Thorpe now. Although they did have Sarri for a while. Merseyside, as we saw, did acquire Erling Haaland, Dybala, Bentancur, Koundé's there. Nuno Mendes at left-back, obviously replaced Robertson, along with Alaba. So there's a nice combination of left-back now. South Yorkshire replaced Calvert-Lewin with Che Adams. They also acquired Jordan Pickford, which is one of the weirdest transfers I've seen because he only cost 4.4 million. Tynan Weir replaced him with Alex Merritt, which you absolutely know I agree with 100%. Bizarrely, fans of my Tenerife save will appreciate the fact he went via PSG. I don't really know what happened here. Again, on the fringes of Napoli, inexplicably second choice to Ospina at Napoli, PSG picked him up for 11.75, I can only presume in a January transfer window, and then sold him at the end of the season to Tynan Weir for almost double. Although he only played 9 games that first season, but he is playing consistently the second season. But yeah, Alex Merritt, my favourite goalkeeper in the game, as anyone on my channel will know, is at my club. And because, I didn't know I actually had the editor. I didn't actually know I had the editor loaded on this save. If I knew I had the editor active, I might have actually fixed some of the League One situations. But no, I haven't used it. I genuinely didn't know I had it open. But that concludes the 5-year one. If you've got anything you want to see, just bear in mind that I am recording these all in advance. So I may not get around to checking certain things until we're a lot further on, probably in the last one, in fact, depending on when I get these released. So thank you for joining me. 5 years down. 5 more for the next one? 10 years in? I think so. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Until next time, ta-ra.